Welcome to the monthly meeting of the Plattsburgh Parking Advisory Committee. Let's first go around the room and see who's here. Matt Miller present. Levi? Here. Mike is not here. Bob is not here. Dave? Yeah. Joe? Yeah. Rodney? Here. Ethan's here. Kate said she... Here. Oh, Kate's here. Yep. Pat might be coming later. Marianne said she could not be here, and Amber said possibly. All right. So I don't have anything to start off tonight, so let's go on to the first public comment period. Anybody who has anything they'd like to say on the agenda items is welcome to come to the podium and address the committee. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the first item, which is a report from Chief Ritter detailing the current parking system enforcement stats for the past month.
I apologize, I don't have it with me, I'll send it electronically.
Ah, okay. All right, and then I'll pass that around to the rest of the committee. Okay, second item, progress report from the chair regarding options to replace the Durkee lot capacity. I'll give you guys a brief update on where we're at. Last week, the City Council signed off on AEDA as the consulting engineer for the design and engineering work for the new Glens Falls parking lot. We're waiting on bid specs for the actual demolition of the building. The city recently applied for a grant through the Northern Border Regional Commission to cover, hopefully, the cost of the demolition and part of the construction of the new lot. We are working with the county on a cooperative plan to both redesign their parking lot and possibly reconfigure Court Street in the city to add over 100 new spaces. And we're working through some cost estimates to determine whether or not it's the best option to move forward. We're continuing our conversations with private lot owners about whether any of them are willing to enter into a shared use agreement to make more parking publicly available. And we also put out an RFP last week for a kiosk system for the downtown, for on-street and off-street spaces that will help us manage the system more effectively in the future. Anybody have any questions?
So the RFP for the kiosk system, I thought after our last meeting, we were going to get a chance to see it before it actually went out. You did send it to us after it went out, so.
Oh, okay.
Informational.
All right, I'm sorry about that.
Was there any comments that you had on it?
Why bother?
Oh, we can make the addendums.
Yeah, we can always put out
Yeah, but
addendums.
you're not going to change the RFP.
Yeah, we
I
can.
mean, it's already out there.
But that's, I mean,
Yeah, you can issue
allowed.
addendums to an RFP. We have a meeting here, a mandatory on-site meeting for anybody who's looking to
Yeah, I
submit.
suppose you can have a pre-bid meeting.
Yeah. So if you have any comments, let us know.
I'll look at it then.
Okay.
Where do they do?
June 18th, I believe. Any other questions?
On the prime project in the parking lot, they're putting in enough parking spaces for their project.
Yeah, for their project, plus 30 publicly available spaces.
Okay, why are they on a different playing field than ICB was when ICB built the building at 14 Durkee, where they had to replace, the footprint of that building had parking space they took up, they had to replace, but they built that tiered parking in the back.
Mhm.
Why are they in a different playing field? Why are we scrambling the city to replace those parking spaces for their project?
Well, one of the reasons was that the only way to build a development on the Durkee lot, include all of the parking for the development itself and all of the parking that you were losing by building on top of the lot, would require another parking garage, which is not the best use of prime riverfront real estate downtown. It wasn't the best use when ICV built the Gateway building either, but
But it was done, but they foot the bill to replace those parking spaces.
I'd have to look through all of the old files just to determine exactly how that happened.
That's how it happened.
Mhm.
The only thing they squabble with the city about is in the back of the parking lot where those stairs go to the railing to the Kennedy Bridge, who's gonna tear it out, who's gonna take that railing out so you can cross over? That's
Right.
why it sits the way it is.
Okay.
But I just feel the city's scrambling for a project that may be too big. It hasn't been the zoning, it hasn't been the planning. What requirements are they gonna have? What do they want changed? We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of putting the cart before the horse again.
Well, we've got a signed development agreement that mandates certain terms, and them providing enough parking spaces for their own uses and 30 for the city is what's written in the development agreement. So at this point, we can't change that.
So we're biting the bullet, the city.
We're at the point where,
And paying for it.
yeah, the city's committed to creating additional parking capacity elsewhere with the intention to install a paid downtown system to cover the costs of capital outlays and staffing.
Was that part of the agreement that we would, the city would do the paid parking with the Prime project?
Was that part of the development agreement?
Yeah.
No. But it is a requirement that would necessitate the creation of parking elsewhere because it's a consideration that the city's planning board takes into account when they look at the off-street parking requirements.
I understand that,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know, I disagree with the project.
Joe, were you on either of those boards when that project?
No, I used to be chair of the planning board, and I've been off it for about.
But not when the Gateway project was.
The Gateway.
It was like 03 to 06.
I forget what year. I might have been a member, I wasn't the chair. But I just think we're biting the bullet to jam this project in, which I say may be still too big for the site.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, at one time, the city sold the air rights to the parking lot, then they bought it back. You know, it's been going back and forth. David, you know that. You know, and I disagree with it.
Yeah.
I still think if you're gonna do parking, build a parking garage.
And
I've seen other cities where the state, the county, the city gone together and built one big parking garage for their municipal buildings
mhm.
and public parking.
It's just not something we can justify at this point, the cost. You're talking $4 or $5 million probably.
So,
And part of the reason we're working here is to better manage not only the new replacement parking, but the parking supply that we currently have. So a hope is, and a plan is, when we develop this management system, empty spots that exist on Oak Street or other various streets will be better utilized throughout the day as well. So it's a part of a bigger system, not just inherently replacing parking.
I understand that. I just think that we're going the wrong direction, that's all.
Okay.
That's my 10-cent opinion.
All right. Fair enough. Anybody else before we move on?
I think it's important to note, I'm hearing from people I talk to throughout the day that people are misunderstanding. They're thinking that the parking committee has decided that downtown is going to pay for parking system. And I just think the record ought to show, so that the public knows, that this committee hasn't decided that. The Common Council has decided that and basically said, it's okay, well, figure out your recommendations on how to implement it. But it's really not something that's come from the parking committee, a decision that the parking committee has made. We're just trying to brainstorm.
Yeah, that's a fair point. The
Yeah.
Common Council did set the direction that they wanted a paid system implemented, and it was left to this committee to try and determine the most effective way to bring that system about.
Correct. And I don't know that a majority of the members of the committee, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, would vote to implement that.
Okay.
With the Common Council giving this PAC, not only creating the PAC, but also giving us the direction, they are our elected officials giving us this guidance. So, that's why we need to work towards that, and they gave us the parameters of
Well,
figuring a managed paid system.
That's what the system they want, then why don't they do it? I haven't heard any counselors gone to any of their constituents and asked them what their opinion was. I mean, that's their job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and what have we heard from the council in general, from Ward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever? You know, we got direction, but why are we here?
It's
To be
community
scapegoat-
input into
to
the
be a
process.
scapegoat for, but I don't know. I just frustrated a little bit with it.
I don't really see personally us as scapegoats. I see us as a chance to have these conversations of how we want the system to function. And then we can bring that in with with your insight in your past in Plattsburgh, the businesses, the landlords, and that's why in the special events in the Strand and the county, so we can take these with the different perspectives. Ideally, yes, people have different opinions on how a paid parking system is going to work. Everywhere, every single city in the world that ever goes to paid parking, you have people that are upset, you have people that have issues. And there's plenty of cities that after they transition have solved a lot of their parking issues. But with us coming together with these different opinions, we can talk about different perspectives of, hey, as a resident, I would really not like to pay for overnight parking. That's me. I wouldn't want to pay for overnight parking. I can say that on the record. I would not like to. And so that would be part of the things that I could bring into this conversation that we have about how a managed system could actually function. So that's the way I really see this function. I know the Common Council, as our elected officials, have made these decisions to move forward with a project that was in the grants from 2016 that were awarded in 2017. And they formed us as a conduit to do some more heavy-duty research and discussion that they necessarily can't do.
Why can't
Or because they're busy also managing the entire city, besides just one downtown project.
But this is the heart of the city. This is what makes the city tick.
And that's why
Yeah, we understand that. That's why we're consulting 12 different members of the
What
community.
we say doesn't mean anything to what they decide. We can vote on something, they can say, nah, we're gonna do this.
Yeah, but they certainly do listen to what you guys discuss here, Joe.
I mean, we're in a special assessment district. What's gonna happen, you go pay parking, they're gonna do away with special assessment? I'd like some input from the council on that.
I mean,
Are they gonna do away with it? Yeah, we don't know.
It's a topic for discussion, yeah.
Yeah, but.
If you make that motion later, I'll second it, Joe.
Take it now.
I guess my view is, it is true that the city's already, the Common Council, the elected officials for the city has already decided that they want to move forward with the DIR project for the development of the Durkee Street parking lot. They've also decided that they believe that paid parking is the best way to go forward and making sure that they manage the parking and generate enough revenue to pay for the parking system that is going to be instituted. Other than that, there's a lot of decisions to be made, and I think they're looking for our guidance to help them. Around this table, I mean, I think it's clear that some people believe that the Durkee Street project should go or not go, and others believe that there should be paid parking or no paid parking. Unfortunately, those are two big decisions that the city has already made. Now they're looking for the best way to accomplish it. I mean, that's sort of what I see as our charge.
I'm still negative on it.
I could tell.
Okay.
I hold my guns, you know, I just.
Anybody else?
That's my opinion.
Once again, with the special assessment district, that I know that gets brought up a lot. One of the things the council, when they did give us our mandates of moving forward, that we went over in our organizational meeting way back in January, they did, as part of their mandate, talk about the reduction or elimination of the special assessment district. So that is something the council, when they formed this committee, has already considered as a way to move forward. And it was also one of the recommendations in Carl Walker's parking study. I think it was number 4.
It's a question of the size of the reduction and the timing of it.
Yeah. So it's up to us to implement, to recommend a system that will function, so they can have a rationale and something to base off of why they would eliminate the current system.
You know, I don't know, I disagree, they took $3,000 some from the special assessment district to do the special study at the bank, yet March, the police
The
department
parking
took
study was paid for. by the way.
$9,000 in tickets, I think it was March, thereabouts. Why didn't they use that money? as parking?
Right now, the way
Yeah, we're
that-
actually, we've discussed with the council and the mayor's office moving all the ticketing revenue into the parking fund rather than into the general fund, as we discussed at one of the prior meetings.
And with the special assessment district, from the 1969 resolution, the 1986 resolution, it's to cover all costs with not just the maintenance of current city parking lots, but also the acquisition of future city parking lots as well. And
That's correct.
that is the rationale of why Richard Marks, our Chamberlain, would use the special assessment district for using that for that kind of funding. Just based on, because that's what that fund by definition is set up for. I mean, I understand that, yes, you don't, like, I can understand that, that.
Listen, I won't say any more right now, move on.
Anyone else?
You looked at me, so I will. So I'm glad to hear you've got a 1969 date there, because the last time we were here,
And then it was updated in 19,
well, it was
1986.
updated because of,
essentially, most
they
likely.
added parking out of the base, right? There's two
It's
parking
two separate
lots.
districts, the Oval District and
Well,
the
they're not
downtown.
separate, it's all under in one budget, but broken out in that budget.
Correct.
But anyway, I mean, I would say that 95% of the people in the city don't understand that any of the public lots down here were bought and paid for. The indebtedness was paid off by the special assessment district. So, I mean, and then there has been refinancing done. We paid them off once, and now we're working on the second and probably second and a half time. So it's like a little slush fund.
Mhm.
The park, if we're looking at, and again, we probably shouldn't even be talking about this here, but the parking study came out of that. The parking study covered way out of the district. I mean, went way out of the district. So, you know, that was probably a general fund item, but it went past the boundaries of the district. It's just how much more, you know, we paid off a lot, and it gets sold for $1. And then we gotta go buy another one. You know, and as it looks now, we're gonna pay for that one too. Anybody who owns a building within the special assessment district. The county does pay on the DSS building. They don't pay on their building, and I'm not saying you should.
Actually, I think we do.
They do pay on all three of
We
their
pay.
They
buildings.
pay on the big
The
one?
government center as well as.
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I must have missed
Yeah.
that. I thought you weren't paying on, the city actually doesn't pay on, they're in the district. How do they escape a special assessment tax? No one's supposed to escape those, except the church escapes it, through an edict of Carlton Rennell. He decided to wave a wand and take that away.
Yeah, there's a number of parcels that are explicitly exempted in the
Yeah.
86 resolution.
So, anyway, it's just, it's a sore subject if anybody has been awake for the last 40 years.
We understand that.
You don't, because you haven't lived it, so,
I comprehend it.
okay.
Then that's another reason why moving towards a paid management system makes more sense than the current special assessment district, because the burden right now of parking on the parking lots, the maintenance and all, the acquisition of new lot, et cetera, is placed solely on the property owners. Property owners can pass that off to tenants or or commercial space tenants. Do they all do that? Maybe some do, some don't. I can't speak for that entirely. But I think it's clear that that's not the most efficient way to pay for parking. And the reason with moving to a managed parking system.
Because it's a minority, so you can.
And that's why in
Prey on it.
the parking studies recommendation and why the council set us up when part of their mandates to is that reduction or elimination of the special assessment district is because I think, especially with the way modern parking theory is moving forward and just their understanding, the councilors' understanding of just the general situation of the parking in Plattsburgh is that's why they want to eliminate it and push for the people who use the parking to pay for the parking. So that's I think the real purpose of that. And that's, I know we haven't been able to sufficiently address or say that it's 100% gone or it's not gone, but it's because we don't have that, what exactly is happening yet. What is actually replacing it? Is it going to be, you know, using an 85% utilization rate where we only charge for parking once parking becomes scarce on streets? Is it going to be something where if it's off streets or it's free first hour and off streets? Is it going to be, we only charge for parking between 8 to 5, like that? Those are the things that we can decide. And I believe once we get to that point and we make that recommendation to the council, they can use that and have that as their backing of saying, this is why we can get rid of the special assessment district. So, and I don't understand, obviously, I'm not a property owner. I don't pay the special assessment. I'm a renter, so my taxes obviously are much lower than most of the people in this room. So I can't say I completely understand the pain of having to pay for this or seeing the parking lots change. What the city is trying to work on is economic development downtown, and with the best option and something the councilors and our elected officials obviously believe in is the prime company development. And it's in their opinion that it's worth moving towards and changing the parking system downtown. And now it's up to us to try to really figure out how that actually clicks into place. And it's not going to be pleasant. No one likes to talk about paid parking. No one wants to do paid parking. You know what people do like? They like to be able to go and find a parking spot with ease and convenience. They don't like to circle around the streets. They like to have something set up. And the longer that we keep, unfortunately, with everyone's different opinions, as Rodney said, as we all know, the more we talk about why prime, why not prime, we're wasting time that we can talk about how it's actually going to function. So we keep pushing these decisions longer and longer. So, yeah. Sorry that was a little bit of a rant, but.
You're entitled.
We forgot to start the hourglass on.
Yeah, my 5 minutes are up. I'm Ethan Vincent. I live down on Bridge Street, so.
All right, so any other comments on that before we move on? Okay. All right, next thing is a report on city parking lot counts from Vice Chair, which is Ethan.
If you guys didn't hear me talk enough, let's keep it going. Could we hit the back for the... So I have been doing, and along with Councilor McFarland, we've been doing parking counts. So the purpose of these parking counts, first, they're not to disprove anything. They're not to say people don't use Durkee, people don't use Broad, people don't use Court Street. That's not what any of this is going to be about. It's really just for us, the city, to get more realistic information of how people are using these parking lots downtown, these four. So the Broad, Durkee, the main one, as we all know, we talk about it all the time. We have the Broad Street lot, which is across the street from the ICB building. We have the Court Street parking lot, which is next to Aleka's and Olive Ridley's, and then the City Hall Place parking lot, which is right across from the park over there. So those are the four lots I've looked at. I didn't bother with the ICB lot. I know the top level is considered public parking. City doesn't own them. We technically own the land, but it's not our parking garage, so I didn't count that. I didn't count the city lot right behind us, and I didn't count the other lot next to the Miller Street. So I counted those four lots, which roughly work out to be 409 parking spaces.
And Ethan, one quick point. Another reason we did this was because it's been brought up in these meetings several times that the parking counts that were taken during the parking study have limited applicability because they were done before the city started enforcing the on-street time limits. So this is a fresh look and up-to-date figures about what these usage statistics look like when we are actually enforcing on-street parking. Go ahead. Sorry.
So this is, I wish I wasn't doing this. Okay, but this is just taken from the slide from the October update that Carl Walker, who did the parking study, part of their slide. So of his recordings on the city lots, on 85% utilization around noon, 55% on the evenings, 100% at Margaret and Court, and 80% was the peak occupancy on Durkee Street in his times that he studied. He used 8 o'clock time periods, he used 10, he used 12, 2, he did a couple evening time counts on the weekend as well.
So these are just averages of...
Yeah, so this is just the peak occupancy, that back from his study, just as like a refresher. The link's there, that will go to on the city's the parking site on the city. There's a section, obviously I know the city's website Leaves a lot to be desired with usability right now, but we have a series of the information from the Carl Walkers, both his updates and the final report on the city's website.
So before you move on,
Yeah.
the top number, 85% new, not including Bridge Street lot?
Yes. He counted the Bridge Street lot as the parking lot that was next, that is technically owned by the owner of the train station.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And once again, as you mentioned, the parking study.
It's not in the district.
Yes, the parking study was expanded past that, what we consider the district. Okay, so since April 22nd to May 10th, I have not been able to go the last couple days. I've unfortunately been a little busy, as much as I like to count parking. Did 46 weekday parking lot counts. I've done a couple on the weekend. Not going to talk about the weekend right now because I don't have enough information to really show anything of substance. So out of these 46 parking counts, there's been,
If you went out 3 times in one day, that's 3 of your 46, or are these 46 separate days?
no, 46 counts.
Separate counts.
So I went on a week, for the fun of it, I decided to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go count parking. So I would go to Durkee Street, count the available cars that were parked there, go to Broad Street, count, take pictures, and then go to, obviously, Court Street, go to City Hall Place. That's why it's at 6 to 6:30, that half-hour range, because I'm one person, and I know I run a bunch, but I'm not that fast. So 6 to 6:30, did 5 counts. 8 to 8:30, I've done 4 counts so far. 7 counts from 10 to 10:30. And then on the afternoon on the weekdays, 5 counts from 12 to 12:30, 4 counts from 1 to 1:30, and we can all read. So 46 parking spots, and some more that haven't been counted in this, but they're weekends. So I'm not ready to really talk about weekend yet because I would like a lot more data. So lowest and highest measured utilization. And so I'm going to put a big asterisk on any of these parking counts because I go to a parking lot, it's 2 o'clock, let's say. I count what's currently there when I'm there. 5 minutes later, 20 people could come in and park. 5 minutes later, 20 people could leave. It's only as good as that moment. And that's why I'm trying to get as much and more, so it's less than one specific point. We can start averaging out longer periods. So this is the lowest and highest I've measured. So it's, surprise, surprise, 6 o'clock in the morning, there's not that many parkers in our city parking lots. So 20% on Durkee Street, 5% in Broad Street, 14 Court Street, 18% City Hall Place. Highest measured, obviously, jumps up quite a bit. So Durkee Street, at 2 o'clock period, 86 was the highest measured utilization. That is in line with what Carl Walker had found in one of his counts, his peak as well. And not saying at 86, there couldn't be times where it's higher than 86. There's good times where it's lower than 86. That's just the peak, the highest that I've measured in the 46 times I've been out. For Broad Street, you see 108 units. That was Friday night, the Friday evening at 6 o'clock. All those actually at the end were 6 on Friday, which is nice. I was happy to see people around. But the 108% people were parking where there wasn't a designated parking spot. So instead of the 59 parking spaces, now there's 64 cars.
I assume there was an auction going on?
Yes. And then Court Street, 6 o'clock, 91%. So, and City Hall Place, 100%, 6 o'clock. I think it's interesting when I looked at some of the numbers is just how it transitions, and in the evening times, especially how parking shifts a little away from Durkee more into these other lots because of maybe the people participating at certain restaurants or other establishments downtown. So this is a big graph that we're going to have a hard time reading. So this is just the average of each time period that I've taken, and there's a conditional formatting to show the colors. So if it's dark green, it's 0%. If it's red, it's higher. So the more red it is, the higher utilization. And this is just the average. So obviously, as I said, I did 10 counts at 2 to 2:30. So those averages, I'm a lot more happy with. I've done 1 count from 3 to 3:30. So that's 1 period in time. So once again, like I said, with a grain of salt, you have to take it with a grain of salt, and that's why I'm going to keep counting parking. So you can see kind of just from this nice little overlay though of when parking really picks up. And it's, for us, it's between that 10 to 3, 30 to 4-ish range. And that makes sense because especially, that's the majority of employees downtown on a weekday. So once again, I haven't been doing a ton of evenings or weekends, which is a completely different, could be a completely different group of people coming downtown. And so that's when you see, DSS employees. I've talked with Rodney about the different employees that come in at different times. And a lot of the employees are able to leave at 4. So when I've gone and done parking counts at 4, there's a lot of time between that 4 to 4:30 range. Got a lot of people excited to go home for the day. So it's a little tough. And I unfortunately listen to music, so it can be a little dangerous too, because I'm just ignorant and just walking around like a fool.
So, Ethan, for Durkee Street, from 10 a.m. till 2:30 p.m., it's pretty close to 80%.
Yeah.
So 80% times the 279 parking spaces, that
be,
leaves about 50 empty parking spaces
roughly.
on average during the prime part of the
On
usage.
average. And once again, an average is only good as an average is. The more data you have, the more you can trust in the average. And that's, I'll say it again and I'll say it again, grain of salt. So this will be eventually, I'll post this on the city's website and we will email it to everyone as well. And this will I'll keep updating all this as I do more parking counts. So now I did some fun graphs. So essentially it's just that all those numbers you just saw thrown on a graph, just to visualize it a little bit more. So this is all of it together. I think you see, so the blue, Durkee, orange, Broad, purple, Court, City Hall Place is the yellow, which is interesting. It's the one that does a lot of spikes, and I found it has the highest variability, the most variance of any other parking lots. And then the total, which would be the average of all. And obviously the total blending in with Durkee is for the sake of Durkee being 289 out of the 409 parking. So obviously, what happens on Durkee influences the total average a lot more than the individual lots. But I wouldn't just, actually I'll talk about that later. So now all these images are just done separate. So now you have Durkee lot isolated. And it goes back to what Rodney said. It looks like, that between that 10 to 2, we're hitting that 80% average. And that's just the average out of the 10, like the counts I've done. There's times where it peaks up to, as I mentioned, 486. There's times where it's 78, let's say. That's just the average so far. And the average, as I do more counts, will fluctuate, whether higher or lower. So, and this is less again to disprove that there's, oh, look how much open space is on Durkee. That's not the point of this. The point is just so we can see how people are currently using parking now that there's been parking enforcement. Broad Street lot, so this is obviously averages. The more you do Fridays, the more the evening, the 6 o'clock will start spiking up. The other days that are 6 o'clock are a little lower. I think what this really highlights with Broad Street is most of the day it's not reaching, let's say, the 85% goal industry standard. I think a big reason for that is there is a section along Broad Street that is labeled 2-hour parking. And I think that is the reason probably why more people don't necessarily park there, because it is just as convenient to park there as on the ICB top or on the Durkee Street lot for most of the let's say DSS employees specifically. And once again, this is weekdays, so I think seeing how we can utilize Broad Street more in the future when the Durkee Street parking lot's under development, and how we can utilize Broad Street to use it more for DSS employees might be a good benefit. Court Street, kind of along the same things. Gets up high around the 10 to 12, and then it kind of keeps there, spikes. Once again, the more accounts I'll do, and I'll get more evening and weekends. We'll see it fluctuate based on usage nearby. City Hall Place, same thing. The high variance, so it can peak past 80%, or there could be 12 spots available. It's all over the place.
Strong crowd. Mm-hmm.
So, and this is the total average again. Kind of smooths it out. Obviously, it's Durkee Street. What happened to Durkee Street weights it more. But we see, once again, really highlighting for our parking lot usage, the main is that on the weekdays, that 10 to 4, that 9 to 4, that time period is when parking downtown is, on our off-street lots, is at its highest. And this is something that when we talk about rates, we talk about when to charge for parking, we can look at stuff, information like this to base it off of when is there actual parking scarcity, when do we need to actually manage the supply. And so my next steps, continue doing parking lot counts, increase evening parking counts, and spend some time on the weekend doing parking counts. And then figure out a system or start trying to keep more accurate counts on street. Unfortunately, during the day, I do not have time to count every car on the streets. It's easy enough to do lots, but I can't do that on my own right now. So there might be a system, potentially talking with Chief Ritter and seeing how the parking enforcement officer currently does their work, and seeing if there's a way to get measurements during her time working. And that's enough talking for me. So that's what I got. Any questions?
Ethan, do you get paid on weekends?
Do I get paid? No, I'm salary, so we get the. It's okay. I mean, it's interesting. I like parking.
Thank you.
As exciting as that is.
Or any like special assessment district.
Parking's parking. So. Okay.
Any questions? Good? All right.
I wouldn't say there was any surprises in that, but it's nice to validate what we think is going on, which is the greatest parking demand is in the middle of the day when the employees are parking and when people are coming downtown to avail themselves of the services.
For weekdays specifically. Obviously,
weekdays.
we'll have to figure
Yeah.
doing more counts on the weekends and information like that. We can see maybe the weekends we realize it spikes higher. So that's something to look forward to in future information settings.
Yeah. And also, even when you look at a lot like the Durkee lot and you think it's full, even at peak usage, you got 40 or 50 spaces that aren't being used, so.
It's easy with, when I realized when I was doing the counts, one of the things is whether it's Court Street, whether it's not, and I'll take a picture, I'll just take a quick picture, let's say I'm using Court Street because, it's the 2 lanes. So I'll just take one to pretty much get like a time stamp of when I was there. And, it's hard to see in the image exactly. There could be 3 cars in a row, spot, but it's hard to see in certain images really what cars are there. And once again, information is only as good as the moment I was there counting. So, yeah.
Okay. All right, item number 4, subcommittee to review the pay station system RFP responses. So as I told Rodney, they are due on June 18th. I'd like at least 3 members from the parking committee to serve on the review committee for the responses, and if possible, if you guys can make it to the pre-bid meeting. We mandated that every firm that is looking to submit a proposal send a representative for an information session and also a tour of the entire downtown area to see exactly what they're going to be proposing.
When is that, Mike?
Do you have the RFP? I think it's next week, next Thursday, I believe.
May 23rd, 10 a.m.
Yeah, that's next Thursday.
That's the pre-bid.
That's the pre-bid, yeah.
Just the walk around.
Probably be a couple hours. So would anybody on the committee like to serve on the review committee?
I can do it.
Okay.
I'll volunteer if nobody else wants to do it.
Okay. Can I get one more?
Who's not here to sign them?
We could volunteer Mary Ann if you want to break the news to her.
Do that.
Anybody else?
I think we can give a chance to maybe potentially to send an email to the individuals
Yeah, I can
who
send
can't
out to
participate.
the folks that aren't here tonight.
I'd be more than willing to back off if you get 2 other people.
Oh, that-
Okay.
If no one else on the committee is able to make it, I will, but I'd rather other people participate in that.
All right. All right, so I'll send out an email to the rest of the committee, see if anybody else wants to take part in that. Item number 5, discussion of fee differential between on-street and off-street parking. And I should preface this with, at this point, we do not want to discuss what the on-street rate is going to be, what the off-street rate is going to be, because that is going to be dictated in part by the capital costs of implementing the new system. All of those costs we do not yet have. We should have them within the next few months. But what we can discuss, which will guide those future decisions, is what you guys think is a reasonable difference between what we're charging for on-street parking versus what we're charging for off-street parking.
Kind of a question, I guess another way to phrase it is, how do we view the value of an off-street spot compared to an on-street spot for just general parking? We could say, some people might say off-street parking spots are more valuable than on-street. And so you should, in theory, if you're managing a scarce resource, the off-street would be more expensive. Or people have said the opposite, where you're like, I would like to be right in front of the store. So those are being right in front of the store, the closest parking that's on-street is the most valuable. That's typically how most cities look at it. They view curb parking as the most desired parking, because of course we all like to park as close as our destination as possible. I mean, if I could park every time right in front of, let's say if I was going to Walmart, I would, except I guess me personally, if there's other cars there, I don't like other cars. I'll park far away, so not the best example of me. But valuing on-street, off-street, that's just as a part of a conversation. And do we want to chart, like potentially, we're not talking about rates again because we still need to figure it out, but more of just the general philosophy moving forward. Is on-street parking more valuable than off-street parking? And in the sense of someone, if we need to manage the parking supply. That was a very roundabout way of getting to that. So thanks for staying with me.
And once we have a discussion about, what's the difference between off-street versus off-street, on-street versus off-street, we can use that as a basis to come up with a larger pricing scheme when we have all those capital costs, and we can determine what the cost to maintain the system, to pay back the money that we use to put it in place, and the administrative costs of it. So what do you guys think is a reasonable difference between on-street and off-street
Or is there?
on an hourly basis?
Is the maintenance on an off-street lot more than maintenance on a on-street parking space?
Well, if Bassett
Bassett's
was
not here,
here,
that's
that'd be
right.
easier to address, because with him being on DPW, he would.
Except that the on-streets are a general fund item and the
Yeah.
off-street are something else, supposedly.
Yeah, Bob, you were talking about just the straight maintenance cost. Does it cost more to maintain? Yeah, okay.
But how do you differentiate when we had a snowstorm coming in, somebody paid for on-street parking, and they gotta get off the street based on the system we have now for snow removal? See, if he's paying less and he's gotta move to the parking lot, are you gonna be able to charge him more?
I imagine in a snow emergency, we would suspend the paid
Well,
system.
We gotta do something concrete, I mean, those are one of the things you need to look at,
Yeah,
you know.
and again, don't hold me to that. That's just,
I would agree, on-street probably would be more attractive, so it's probably worth it.
yeah.
Sure, wouldn't you want to park in front where you're going to be?
And I think
Exactly.
The way the current system works, that's where it is. I mean,
Yeah, because off-street's
I don't know
free
the
right now for the most
percentage.
part.
Yeah, I mean, but just in general, okay.
Is it 30 or 40%? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you definitely want to encourage employees to park in off-street
Oh, yeah.
for the most part, to leave patrons for the on-street.
Yep.
So,
It has to start at the top, though. The owners of the businesses want to be right in front of their spot.
yeah,
You know?
there's no question. There's some that
It's
feel that way.
unbelievable.
All right, so in general, you guys think on-street should be more expensive than off-street as a general rule?
I think it'd be more desirable,
Just from a convenience factor, yeah.
And I also think that another way of regulating it would be offer monthly passes or annual passes for off-street, but not on-street,
Mm-hmm.
as another way of encouraging people who live downtown to park in an off-street lot versus on the street.
And that could be the difference in the fee structure, that
Yeah.
the longer you buy for it, the lesser the cost.
All right.
How many passes have we been selling?
Quite a few.
Yeah, although I haven't checked with finance in a week or two, so I don't want to quote you a number. Last time I checked, it was somewhere around 150 or 200.
Is that total or
That was total
since inception?
since inception. Yeah.
So we can ask finance, and then we could send an email to our
Yeah.
committee as an update.
Do you have any idea of breakdown? Is it mostly individuals coming in to buy them, or is it businesses, or is it government?
The few times I've heard anything, it was a couple individuals buying multiple passes, less than an individual coming in for a single day. Um,
I know Marianne said she had bought several for her business.
I think I've bought 20 so far
Yeah.
for
How do you
employees.
see it working so far? What's your opinion or feedback
I
from
think
anyone
it's
else?
fine. For my usage, it's not a problem. I just provide them to employees on days when we're there for a long time. Sort of with the stipulation, park out of the way.
Yeah.
You know, don't park right in
Not
front
like,
of
yeah, this-
anybody's business. You know, we try to stay out of the way. I have heard from some local businesses that they're not overly happy with residents of the apartments buying them and then sort of parking in front of their business for the whole day at a time. I've heard that from 2 different businesses downtown.
So the
for my usage-
parking passes can be used in any
Anywhere.
public parking space,
Any
whether it's
2 hour
on street
space,
or
I
off.
believe.
Yeah,
I don't
any
think the
2
30
hours.
minutes.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't use it
Apply.
off street because it's free anyway.
Yes.
So,
Yep. So I've heard a couple of complaints on that. For my usage, it's been fine. It's been, well worth $3 to not have to remember to go move the vehicle, every few hours. Is it a good permanent solution? I don't think so, but temporarily, I think it's been fine.
Okay. Any other thoughts on off-street versus on-street?
I think we need to give serious consideration to how to allow the residents to park during the evening versus during the day.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
For those that are not using their car during the day. I personally think it would be fine for them to park on the street at night, but incentivize them to move the car, once you get to 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. at some time in the morning, so it can be available for patrons to the local businesses.
Right. Yeah, I could agree with that. Anyone else?
What kind of information to have these kind of conversations in the future? Do we want what do we want to help frame these kind of conversations? What can make us be more?
More parking
Productive.
counts.
Yes, I don't.
Every hour.
Every hour, I'll-
Yeah.
Off, Rodney.
You could get them done fast if you did it at noon as well.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I just got.
The
Are there different municipal systems that you can research and that could serve as models for this body to consider?
Oh, yeah, we've looked at several. It's just a question of what the final configuration for ours is going to look like before we can make a lot of those decisions.
Right, but at least you have some kind of formula
Yeah.
Mhm.
on which to base your decisions or exploration.
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
One of the hardest things right now is we don't know if we're talking about, I'll just take on-street parking, a quarter an hour or $1 an hour. And I understand why we can't have that conversation yet because it's gonna, a lot of it is gonna depend on how much revenue needs to be raised in order to pay for the parking capital costs. So if it's a quarter an hour on the street, it probably is going to be less than that in a parking lot. And Is it gonna be a quarter an hour for every on-street parking space, or is that gonna change depending on where you are in the downtown core?
So that's, I think to follow up, I know I've had some conversations separately with Pat about parking and the curbside that he wanted to talk about. I'm not gonna use it all, and if he doesn't make it in by the time we call this a close, he's looking to potentially use some other avenue, whether it's a common council meeting, to talk about some of those ideas, and we would pass it forward to everyone in this committee. I think one way we could think about with on-street is along the lines of that utilization, the 85%, or whatever number we think's right for open. 85% is usually 1 every 7 spots.
So what you're saying is, ideally, the pricing structure would result in 85% of the parking spaces on street being used at any one time.
Ideally.
Yeah, and no more than that, because you don't want more than 85, because that means you have the part that's what the general academics show as, and theories, both in practice and just on paper, show being, that's kind of like the golden number is 85. That means there's always spaces available, but it's also full and there's movement.
And you price it accordingly. So if you have a street with 8 spaces on it and half the time, half the spaces are open, you can infer that the parking rate on that street is probably too high and you want to bring it down to increase the utilization. If it's always full all the time, it's a good chance that the parking rate is too low and that you might want to raise it up to make sure at least 1 or 2 spaces are open from time to time.
And there's chances where we have a street, you can use like Oak Street for an example, where there's roughly 70, 74 spaces if you measure out the 22 feet on the sides. And let's say that's filled up 40% at max on most hours that we would consider, let's say, a paid parking system. The question now is, do we need to pay for, do we need to actually implement paid parking there until we find out from parking counts that it's up to that 85% or parking becomes scarce?
Yeah, because if you make it free, it may relieve some of your other parking spaces for patrons.
And that's the way that management works is like you have street A, people love street A, it's 100% filled all the time, but then you have street B when they're both free. Street B is less used because, once again, everyone likes being as close as possible. You raise, let's say you move up to a quarter on street A, but street B is still free. You get those people with their economic preferences start choosing, I'd rather walk the extra 2 minutes to go to street B, or however the distance is. And that's what starts moving that parking. So then you have that available parking for people who choose to park on a certain street or section. And then you still have, you just better utilize the spaces you have. There's a lot of information. I know in our committee, and Pat had sent out a lot of different studies and reports that I'm sure most of them talk about kind of that general theory.
We'll talk about the difference between on-street and off-street parking, the rates.
Yes,
If you had any thoughts on that.
I think off-street parking should be cheaper. On-street parking is generally more desirable than off-street parking. We hear it now. The thing that surprises me the most is when people come up to me and say, we have a parking problem right now, we don't have enough parking. I think it's a guy, John Schneider, something like that. He was saying he was protesting out in front of City Hall at the first one of those protests, and when I went out and tried to talk to them, he was saying that we need to keep the Durkee Street lot and build a parking garage now. So addressing that, we have nowhere near enough parking now. I, as you guys all know, disagree with that, but it addresses the situation where if people think we have a parking problem now, and what that really boils down to is if people think we have a parking problem now, it means we don't have enough parking close to where I want to go. And you saw that a lot before January of this year, before the city started enforcing the 2-hour parking limits. And I've had business owners come up and tell me, man, I'm really glad you started enforcing those parking limits because there's actually parking in front of my business now. And we have complaints too. don't get me wrong, people who get parking tickets are not happy. It brings me back to why the parking meter was invented in 1935, because Oklahoma City, their downtown, everything near the shops was being taken up by employees of businesses. And when they started the parking meters, employees started parking further away and walking so that the spots in front of businesses were open to patrons. So on-street parking should typically be cheaper than off-street be more expensive than off-street parking, because you want to funnel people who are gonna park for a long time, not a lot of turnover, residents or employees, and you want those prime spots right in front of the business to be available for patrons who are gonna come in and patronize our downtown businesses. So I think it should definitely be cheaper. How much cheaper is up to debate. I would say maybe like if you're charging for off-street lots, it should maybe be half the price of on-street lots, let's say. The exact amount, I don't know for sure. Off-street lots you can also deal with in different ways. You don't necessarily need meters in off-street lots, you can deal with permit parking. I think our off-street lots should typically be focused on, well, here we go. I see our parking as 3 problems that need to be addressed. The first one is residents, where can they park? I think that one is probably the easiest of the 3. The second one is probably the most difficult, and one we're gonna face is employees parking. Our peak demand seems to be between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Is when our parking lots get by far the most use. I don't know if Ethan showed you his graph or anything.
We were all very impressed.
Yeah. And that's typical of most cities. So it's because employees come in, and especially one of the largest constituencies that's showed up at these committee meetings and at council meetings even, I think, is the Department of Social Services. They have about 140 to 160 employees, and they've been using the Durkee Street lot, so of course they're going to be concerned. I think we should focus on off-street parking. It can be by permits. They're given out to employees, sold to employers, however it's done, but we want to funnel employees to the off-street parking lots and make sure that the on-street parking spots that are the most prime, the best for going to a business.
Yeah, customers.
Available for customers.
Yep.
So I'm assuming that the pot of money that will be used for parking management is going to be a combination of whatever you charge for parking and all the violations.
Mm-hmm.
All the permit sales.
Yeah,
All of that will go into an account that would be used to offset the parking costs. So ideally, you would generate enough revenue to equal the total cost to manage parking.
plus the cost of the debt service for the capital outlays.
Yeah, I would include that as.
Yep,
Yep,
yeah,
I would
okay.
include that as part of the cost. So that will be some mental gymnastics to try to figure out what that number is so that you know the total amount of money that you have to capture, with your parking management system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm still against focusing on costs or revenue generation when designing a parking system. I think the number one goal for setting prices and stuff should still be optimization of our parking, of efficiency, making sure there's parking for people to park at if they want to go someplace. And price can be set by the market then, and I think you'll notice on the studies that have been done, if price is set at the right price, the money comes. They tend to generate more people coming downtown if parking is convenient. You can think of examples, one I can think of off the top of my head is Harrisburg. If you just set the price, and great examples of this are when cities sell their parking. Chicago did this recently. In Chicago, when they did their proposal to sell basically their on-street parking to a bidder to run their meter systems, their prime focus was on getting revenue. They
That
were
worked
selling
out
it to
terribly
the
for
highest
them.
bidder. I think they sold it for like $7 billion.
For 40 or 50 years worth of enforcement
Yeah.
fees, yeah.
And I think that's a terrible idea personally because businesses are gonna be focused on profit generation. And parking is a public service. It's especially on-street parking is gonna be a fixed supply. You can't really add more very easily. So if you give that out to a monopoly whose focus is on profit maximizing, the price of parking is gonna be higher than the social optimum price of promoting a lot of parking. I think what we want is a system that encourages our on-street parking to be as full as possible, and then, but also handles scarcity so that it's not overused so that people can't find a parking spot.
Yeah, we don't want to charge any more than we have to manage the system effectively.
Yeah, and I think if you do that, it'll help downtown businesses thrive. Paid parking, most studies, and if it's done well, and in fact, every study that I've read and have been able to find, so it shows that paid parking actually helps downtown businesses. And it's easy to think in the back of your mind that that's not true. If I have to pay to park somewhere, why would I go down here? I could go to the mall or somewhere else. But on the flip side of that is if you can't find parking because all the parking spots are taken up, what are you gonna do, circle the block for 10 minutes? In Plattsburgh, people aren't circling that long, but I can tell you, when I lived in New York City, finding a parking spot was quite the neighborhood thing. I remember when I was living on Aiken Place in New York City, you'd have to change every, there was parking free on the right side, but every Tuesday they had street cleanings, you have to park on the left side. And when the parking changed back to the right side, the entire neighborhood got together and we all parked on the right side an hour before you could. And the entire neighborhood was sitting on that right side, waiting in case the parking meter came. We were all just sitting in our cars. Most people brought a friend to talk to. And then once the time hit the time where you're allowed to park, everyone got out, shook each other's hand, said hello, and went back on with their merry lives. But you definitely do not want a situation where you can't find parking.
Yep.
I think a lot of what you're saying, Patrick, and I've read everything you sent once, at least twice, sometimes twice. Most of what I'm seeing is for much larger cities. Harrisburg, I just looked up the population, it's 49,000. It's a far cry away from the size of Plattsburgh. And I just think, obviously, the majority of the research is coming from very, very large cities with really good public transportation and really good infrastructure. And so I think that needs to be noted, that potentially, it's great to read the studies and they're useful, but a lot of them may or may not be applicable to
Well,
downtown.
and I would say when you read this, Ethan and I were talking about this yesterday, right? So my parking proposal for on-street, I think I'm on the agenda to talk about it. There's different ways to accomplish that, and certainly San Francisco has this system where every single spot has a sensor, and they have this huge algorithm that takes into account who's parking where, how much we should charge, and parking changes every second of the day in different spots depending on demand, which would be great. In Plattsburgh, it would be great to have that. It would be great to have an app that showed you where every free parking spot in the city was, so you could go right there.
We have Ethan.
Yeah, it'd be great to have a sign in front of our lots that say, there's 3 parking spaces available, there's no parking spaces available, try somewhere else, or something like that, but there is a cost-benefit analysis. But I will say that most of those studies, it's not about size. Most studies are gonna come, because most people, we don't have a lot of people studying parking in Plattsburgh. Maybe Ethan and I. They're gonna focus on large cities because that's where it is, and there certainly are aspects to those studies, to those articles, that are gonna focus on large cities, and that won't be apropos to Plattsburgh. You said transportation systems, so yes, that's another way to alleviate parking, alleviate demand. But a lot of it, especially the on-street parking calculus, deals with handling scarce resources. And parking is a typical tragedy to common sort of situation, and Plattsburgh certainly has it there. We have to manage our parking efficiently. And Plattsburgh is more analogous to a lot of other cities because we don't have a lot of land. I think we're, what, 5 square miles? We have a downtown. It's certainly gonna be slightly different, and certainly we'll have to scale it to meet Plattsburgh's needs. But a lot of the ideas presented in parking are dealing with scarcity. And if you have, 200 cars that wanna park downtown, and you only have 100 parking spaces, how do you do that? Or something like that. Now, we have, what, 400 parking spaces downtown roughly?
On the street, if,
On the street.
depending on like, once again, how you cut the district, but roughly 400 spaces. Some streets, Oak Street, as I brought up earlier, doesn't designate specific spots, it's just one single parallel line. That can allow you to fit more cars than normal, because if some people had, if like 5 people had Honda Civics, they could park next to each other. But if 4 people had trucks, it takes a lot more space. So it's a guessing game with some of the street parking, but for the general 400 is a good number for on street.
But I mean, essentially, if you break it down, and I understand the managing of the resource, but essentially, you're basically just pricing some people out of it.
You should not be. So there are certainly people that are gonna be more cost averse than others.
Sure.
Now, parking can also be based on, there's other things that lead people to park in a certain space other than cost.
Sure.
And the analogy to congestion pricing is a good example. I think I shared that Strongtown's article on congestion
Yes.
pricing, where, the common refrain is that this hurts poor people the most. But in practice, it tends to help them more. Because say you typically are someone that's really cost averse, you don't want to spend money on parking. What about that time you're in a big hurry and you're late for a job interview, and you can't find any parking anywhere near it because there's free parking everywhere and all the parking near where you're going is full. So you circle around, and then you are late for your job interview. That's an extreme example. Another thing might be if you're carrying a lot of stuff and you want to park closer. There are different situations that can arise where price isn't the only thing that's going to affect whether you want to park closer or further from your destination. But certainly there are situations where people will want to park for free. And typically the reality with that is, all right, if you want to park for free, and in Plattsburgh, from what I've noticed, you'll be able to find free parking. You might just have to walk further for that. But what I would like to design is a system that anyone that has a need for parking close to their destination will be able to get it. Now, unfortunately, the only way to do that is to charge pricing for it, because the only efficient way to allocate pricing more effectively between people's needs is to charge a price for it. We can't be, doing an income survey and be like, are you good, but it does help certain people in certain situations. And parking, I don't think in Plattsburgh is gonna be like San Francisco, where it's $15 an hour to park here or something like that. We're talking probably less than $1 an hour, maybe if it's crazy up to $2. I don't know exactly what the price points on Plattsburgh are, because we haven't started doing it yet. But I don't think pricing people out, and that's exactly why we can't focus on making sure that we get $50,000 a year to cover debt service. Because we may end up then, if we're charging a price. So let's say what Rodney was saying, that we need to make this amount of money a year. Let's say for this example, I'm coming up with a number off the top of my head, $20,000 to come up with this amount. We need to come up with it to do it. And you just take every parking spot in Plattsburgh, in our downtown, 400 parking spots, divided by 20,000, and all right, that's what we need to make. So that math works out to, I'm not gonna do the math in my head, because I'm gonna mess it up, but like $1 an hour. There are certain spots that probably could justify $1 an hour at certain times of day. But there are certain spots that are never gonna justify that amount, and you would be overpricing it and charging too much, so you'll create a parking desert in certain parts of the city when no one will wanna park. No one's gonna wanna park in front of the St. John's Church if you have to pay for it, unless it's a Sunday morning or sometime when people actually wanna park there. Not that many people are parking right there, it seems right now, unless I couldn't see all the way, but so if you were charging $1 to park there, you'd probably see no one park there. And you're not getting any revenue if the price is charged too high for people to actually park. So you have to be very careful to not, brush or paint with a wide brush like that. We have to make sure that the price we should charge for every single spot should be the minimum price that can be charged to make sure that we're not overburdening the system. And I feel like I'm already getting into what I wanted to talk about, so
You're not there yet?
Yeah, 2 more hours here.
I hope we brought some coffee. But so I think the focus has to be on an efficient parking system, and I think money will come from that. The greatest example of this, by the way, is Old Pasadena, California, where they set up it was the first place that I know of to set up a parking benefit district. And in Old Pasadena, it was kind of a dying city. They had unlimited free parking, and people were parked there for days sometimes. You couldn't find a parking spot. And they implemented a system for efficient parking, and they took all that money to then reinvest in the streets. So they fixed sidewalks were the first thing they do, which is a great thing to use your parking money on, because it makes the streets more walkable, more friendly. It also saves the city money in that they don't have broken sidewalks that people are tripping on and then suing the city for. And then they've caused it to be able to facade improvements. I think it's run by the business development district in there, business investment district in Old Pasadena. And then they were making so much money that they were able to even bury their electric lines underground. And what this has caused is that more people want to come to Old Pasadena, and they find a parking spot. The cost of parking has jumped, but people still come there because it's a more vibrant city, and it's led to this like cycle. I think in that chapter in that, in actually this book, I said they talk about Old Pasadena, but they talk about it in a lot of articles and stuff too, where you can really create a cycle where you're taking that money, investing in your downtown, and it really leads to a lot of improvements and a cycle of people want to come downtown, so you get more money from parking. And also don't underestimate the amount of money that can be generated by small little transactions.
So was that your report, or?
No, that's not.
Okay.
So that's a little different than the theory that you should charge the least amount possible for a space.
Why's that? Not the least amount possible
I mean, you're
for a
gonna fund
space.
city government with parking?
It's not city government, and that's what you don't
What's
really want.
sidewalks? I mean, that's city government.
Nah, David, the intention is to charge as little as we have to effectively manage the system. If there is anything left over, that goes into improvements on the streets in the areas where we are charging for parking. It's not the intention of the system, it's just if we end up with some extra money, the intention is to put it where people are spending the money so they can see what they're getting for their money, rather than putting it into the general fund.
The whole point of the parking benefit district is to fund the money back into the neighborhoods that have the parking meters. So, and actually the parking meter revenue then wouldn't be funding uptown or anything like that. Wouldn't be funding replacing sidewalks there. It would just be a benefit to those places that were, that's how Old Pasadena does it. There's other ways to handle money that are coming in, but a very bad way, and I think we talked about this last time, is to just put it into the city's general fund. Because then the city might be inclined to increase rates.
Right.
I do think that whatever method is instituted, it be as consistent as possible. What I wouldn't want to see is a system where I'm parking on Wednesdays here and it's costing me a dollar an hour, but on Thursdays, it's costing me $2 an hour, or, you know,
Yeah.
a completely different amount. I think people need to know, if I park there, I know what it is. I've parked there before, I know what the cost is. And if it's fluctuating often, it makes it much less likely people are gonna be comfortable coming and parking. And they'll have to spend a lot of time figuring out what are the costs for, you know, the various places I could park.
And that, it's tough, because I agree. There's certain places I like to specifically go, whether it's parking or if it's anything else, because it's a creature of comfort, and I know like that's going to be where I want it to be at that time. And so knowing that kind of that routine's really nice. I think with the changing rates, the downside is if we take too long to change rates and we overcharge, it's not efficient.
And I understand in the beginning,
Yeah.
it's going to be very hard to tell where you think most of the demand is might not be where it is, and you might have to fluctuate. There may be 2 or 3 fluctuations, you know, in your first 6 months until you sort of get it down. I would hate for there to be a lot of changes continually. even
Yeah,
after that
and
period.
in the original city council resolution that created this committee, it was intended that we meet at least on a quarterly basis, because we felt that was a reasonable amount of time to allow for one configuration to generate enough data to determine whether or not it was worth changing. So 3 or 4 times a year, I think, is a reasonable.
Well, one of the things I don't think is going to happen, and Kate is, I think she's right in a lot of the studies. I've also read a lot of the pieces that, you know, Patrick's put online, and I think the number of people who come downtown parking when it was free is going to be approximately the same number of people even when we start charging for parking, because we don't have a subway system. We don't have a lot of alternative methods to get people in here that are currently driving their vehicles. You know, you may get a little bit of that. You might get a little bit of ride sharing or something, but most of the people who are driving downtown and parking now will probably be doing it after whatever system we employ.
You got to get James start working on the CCPT more. Get like starting.
I kind of disagree with both your points to a degree.
That's fine.
I do think that people will, part of the whole point of parking is to control the quantity demanded, of paid parking rather. And if you do that, there are a lot of options for people to do. People might decide not to come downtown unless it's an off-peak hour and parking might be cheaper. People might carpool. I do think you're right on a lot of, people are, especially with employees, they're still gonna drive down here. People might walk. There's a lot of people that live walking distance from downtown that don't walk because they know there's free parking. I'm guilty of it myself sometimes. Me and my wife do walk downtown quite a bit, but there's times where we both decided to drive and meet up downtown instead of meeting at our house, which is a mile away, and both driving in one car or both putting the baby in a stroller and walking. There's people that could ride their bikes. People do tend to change their behaviors based on incentives, based on cost especially, but other things as well. And I do think that the word that was used in the book Happy City was presentism, thinking that things are going to remain the same and people are going to act the same now, even when things change in the future, when circumstances change in the future. And when the Prime people first came and were given their presentation, the guy, I think his name was Steve from McFarland Johnson, the architecture firm, he was saying this might lead, you know, when this building is here, things won't be exactly the same. You know, people won't be parking in Durkee Street, and you'll see a kind of cultural shift. And if you look at the slides that John Forster put out when he was doing his research for making the parking study, I wonder if I have it here. The one thing that really struck out to me was when he was measuring how much walking Plattsburgh does. And it's far below Burlington.
And Watertown and other cities.
So these two slides. One is how many people drive alone. And this was when Plattsburgh had a pretty laissez-faire parking system. People that drove alone, Plattsburgh was 84.3%. Glens Falls was 74.1, Watertown 76.5, Lake Placid 71.2, Burlington was 52.9, and the national average was 76.4.
And what's Plattsburgh again?
84.3. Far more people are driving alone in Plattsburgh than other comparable cities and the national. And if we look at comparable cities with who
Who did
walks.
this study?
What?
Who did this study?
John Forrester from Carl.
This was the city study.
This was part of.
Was that part of the original?
Yeah, this was part of the
Okay.
parking study.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about walking, I'll go backwards this time. The national average is 2.8%. Burlington, which, and they go through the rates before this, Burlington, which has the highest rates, 21% walk. Lake Placid, it's 11%. Watertown, it's 5.9%. And Glens Falls, it's 7.9%. Plattsburgh there, we're 1.7%. Well below all the other comparable cities and below the national average by quite a bit as well. So, and that's when Plattsburgh had completely free parking. All these other cities have some sort of managed parking system. So I do think that people are going to react to incentives. It's hard to tell exactly how, and certainly certain people won't. But I do, and I thought about this, I was in Binghamton about a month ago, and my wife took our daughter down to see Sesame Street Live, and we met up with my in-laws there. And I was studying their parking system. They had a parking system, by the way, you couldn't tell how much it would charge you in parking. I think probably because it changed throughout the day. My car stayed at the hotel the whole time though. But they had a vibrant parking system. Their streets were all full. Their restaurants were mostly full. And I remember we were going to a pretty nice restaurant it was me, my wife, my two in-laws, and my daughter. And it was 3-minute drive away. And my wife has a car that fits 7 people. And she's like, all right, let's all jump in my car, I'll drive. And my father-in-law and mother-in-law were like, no one wants to climb in the back seat, we'll just drive separately. For a 3-minute trip that had free parking at the end of it, the restaurant had free lot. And I couldn't help thinking after, I was reading parking, I think earlier that day, that if they charged maybe even $1, $2 where we were going, I wonder if they would have said the same thing, like, oh yeah, we'll take 2 separate cars and have, twice the amount of travel involved.
I mean, it's, people don't often think about it, but parking is a resource, and it's like any other resource. If you manage it poorly, degradation is going to follow. If you manage it effectively, you're going to get vitality.
But I also think, and I'll get more into this, maybe I should just jump into what my idea for on-street parking is, but I do think the prices should fluctuate. If you look at Ethan's graph, the amount of parking demand fluctuates. The most it fluctuates is throughout the day. We don't have a high parking demand at night. At 1 in the morning, I'm sure there's almost none. But during the peak hours of when people are working, people are coming downtown to eat lunch and stuff like that, that's when parking demand is the highest. When demand is the highest, the price should be the highest.
All right, any further discussion on number 5 before we let Pat get into his...
What is number 5?
5 is the on-street
That was
and
the
off-street.
difference between off-street and on-street.
It was very
Yeah,
focused
we should charge
conversation.
less for off-street, that's fine.
Okay.
That was the point of all that.
All right, so your report on curbside parking.
Yeah, okay, well, I think I got into it quite a bit.
Yeah, anything you'd like to add?
But here's what I think we should do to handle curbside parking. As a quick aside, people, and this is why I think it will help businesses. If you don't charge for parking, then typically what drives people to park is they want to be near their destination, but they're going to be pushed by how long of walk they would have, how much they would have to pay for parking, how many people are in the car. And what you get when you don't charge for parking at all is the people that will park the closest to the destination that you want are the people that are solo drivers, there's only one person in your car, and people that have a lot of time, because if that parking spot isn't full, they can drive around and there's no one else in the car to kind of hound them to just find a parking spot quick. And so you get these people that are looking to park for a long time, so don't mind waiting around, and they might circle around enough a few times to see if a parking spot fills up. If you charge for parking, it actually does the opposite. If you charge the right amount for parking, the people that are gonna park close and pay for parking tend to be people with multiple people in their cars with multiple people in them, because they can split the cost of the parking. People that are not gonna park for a long time and in a hurry, because if you're gonna run into a store real quick and buy something, or you're gonna go in and buy shoes in 10 minutes, why walk for 5 minutes away? You might pay the short amount for parking instead of, but if you're gonna stay there all day because you live upstairs and are just gonna go watch TV all day, you're not gonna pay for parking to park for 5 hours. But the system that I think that the city should adopt, and this is not my idea, it was, I think I mentioned it before, but it was developed by a Columbia University economist and Nobel laureate named William Vickery in 1954. And he couldn't implement it. He came up with the idea. He won the Nobel Prize in congestion pricing, which is why it's kind of similar to this. And he came up with this idea for parking, but he discovered that he couldn't implement it in 1954 because the technology didn't occur. We had a woman come into the council meeting, I want to say like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Her name was Sylvie Boudreau. And she asked the question, Plattsburgh had parking in the 80s and they got rid of it sometime in the 80s. And like, why did they get rid of meter parking and switch to time limits? And I wanted to answer her, and I didn't know the actual answer. I had no idea. I was 5 when the 80s ended. Why Plattsburgh stopped doing parking?
Dave?
No, I'm gonna let him finish. He
Yeah.
has more sand left.
But I imagine it was because parking back then was a mess. You had to have a meter, you had to have exact change or overpay. If you didn't have change, you're stuck in a situation, should I run in the store and get change and come back real quick, or should I go park somewhere else? And if you failed to do it right, or you didn't estimate your time correctly and you didn't pay enough, you get a parking ticket. And we've seen parking tickets are a very poor way of incentivizing people where to park. They're usually way over expensive. $15 a day for parking over 2 hours, which is why I hate our current system. William Vickery talks about how time limits are very inefficient. They don't affect people that are gonna park under the 2-hour limit. If you do wanna park over the 2-hour limit, say you had to go somewhere for 2.5 hours, you're completely banned from parking in that space, even if you were willing to pay for more. And so he came up with the idea that you should charge the price point that effectively gets the occupancy rate of a certain block to 85%. And the beauty of this is all the city council has to do is say, we direct the parking enforcement officer or the head of parking administration to develop to charge the price that would get to that would promote an 85% parking occupancy rate. 85% means 1 in 7 parking spots are empty. That works out to, on a typical block, there's 1 spot empty on each side of the street. So if you charge the right price and you get that 85% occupancy rate, then if you're willing to pay the price, there will be a parking spot on any block that you want to park at. And the other beauty of that is if you want to park somewhere, or let's say and for Plattsburgh, you might say that there's a lot of blocks aren't full. Even when we charge nothing, they're less than 85% full. Then the price there is 0. So Kate, I think your office is on Brinkerhoff.
Correct.
So on certain times when Brinkerhoff only has 1 or 2 cars on it, the parking rate should be $0. That's what the market is asking for there. We shouldn't overprice that, because if there's only 2 people parking on that whole block, then what's the point of charging a rate? You're just pricing people out of it. Meanwhile, if down near the Twisted Carrot in Himalaya, there's a ton of people parking right there, and instead of people not being able to find a spot, if someone wants to go park there and is willing to pay the price, then they can. If someone doesn't wanna park or pay the price, then they can park up on Brinkerhoff, which is further away, or if the price point there is not zero, they can park up on Oak Street. They can park farther and farther away until they can satisfy their need of what they wanna pay versus what they wanna walk. And the beauty of that is, if it's implemented correctly, you will have a spot for everyone to park, and it's not just benefiting those who happen to get there first, it's not benefiting those who have time to drive around the block. Driving around the block, what they call cruising, is actually horrible for the environment, it's horrible for the city, it's unsafe. If people are circling around looking for parking spaces, they might not be paying attention to people walking across the street. They're just looking for parking spaces, they tend to move, to drive faster, get around other cars. Plattsburgh, we're not as cutthroat as it as other cities, but if you know that there's a parking spot everywhere you wanna go, then it's an efficient parking system, you're not overcharging for parking, but it does lead to having to change prices. Prices just change throughout the day, to adequately assess demand. And it's easy to set up. If you're charging 50 cents to park on Margaret Street, let's say, and you go down there and the street is completely full, you're not charging enough. If you're charging 50 cents on Brinkerhoff Street and the street's completely empty, then you're charging way too much. That way, it's not in political hands. The council's not dictating how much you charge on each street, what price is appropriate for each street. The price should change depending on the time of day and depending on where you're trying to park.
So what kind of burden do you see this putting on the residential streets? Because now if someone doesn't want to pay for parking, they can go to Durkee Street and they can park there. And I think a lot of employees do. When that's gone and all of the proposed new lots, all of the changes, the Court Street parking lot, all of those things come through, there's not going to be a Durkee Street lot or any substitute lot. Off-street is also going to be priced at a certain rate. So that's going to push the people who don't want to pay for parking. For example, an employee who comes in to work 8 hours, if that's going to cost her, $8 an hour to go waitress, or where is that going to push these people actually parking? They're going to end up on the residential streets. They're going to be up Brinkerhoff. They're going to be in your neighborhood. It's going to take that burden and push that out on these residential streets that may or may not be equipped to deal with the increase in traffic. I think it's just something worth considering.
That is worth considering, and the way you can do that is you can make a parking benefit. If parking then, because of paid parking in the downtown, if the demand is so high that parking is rather expensive downtown and people sprawl out into residential neighborhoods, the appropriate way is actually set up a parking benefit district in that neighborhood and give the parking benefit district kind of like pseudo-governmental power to then issue permits to park on their street. So say you have employees and they want to park up on Couch Street, let's say, because parking's become so expensive downtown. Then you may be able to buy a permit from that parking benefit district, which then the proceeds would go to that parking benefit district that they could use to fix their sidewalks or something there. I don't see Plattsburgh getting there anytime soon. We have quite a lot of parking downtown. The only reason that I think, and I have spent a lot of time walking around the city, and everywhere I go I see empty parking.
Sure.
And the reason that is because it's just not priced efficiently, it's not used efficiently. I don't know what the price for parking off street will be. And I sent an email to you, and there's possibility it could be free, right? If the right price for parking off street is free, then it should be free. I have a feeling we'll charge employees or employers, however you want to do it, a permit. And the reason that is because we don't want people parking in a lot where people need to park for work and be there for a week. You see that sometimes on Durkee Street. You see that sometimes before January 3rd on Clinton Street,
Oh, yeah.
which was the problem.
Brinkerhoff,
See,
too.
we saw it on Brinkerhoff and Margaret Street. So I do think we're gonna wanna have permits. Residential permits can be, people wanna park at night. and then you sell a permit for employees during the day. Something like that, and it could be really cheap, where it's not really affecting people. And then it might more than offset the cost of the special assessment district.
How cheap is really cheap, not affecting people, you know?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. All I know is the pricing should be parking should be priced only to handle scarcity. It shouldn't be, so if a bunch of people wanna be there, who should get it? The one who is willing to pay for it, and then the others can walk a little way. But parking in Plattsburgh, I think we have enough of it to handle this, and we won't know exactly for sure until we start, but I don't foresee a lot of people who are gonna wanna go to Hobie's, let's say, parking halfway down Couch Street.
I agree. At this point, I think there is a reasonable amount of parking in Plattsburgh, but 289 spaces are about to go away. And we don't have a concrete plan to fix that yet.
Well,
So,
289
concern.
spaces are not going away. I think even if you take so I think we should take the most conservative replacement options. I think we replace, if we do, the Arnold Pavone lot, if we, there's 30 spaces, at least 30 spaces going in the prime, development.
So 259 going away.
No,
If we're saying
Yes.
that, yes, if we're saying that if Prime has allotted for 30 public spaces, 259 spaces are going away instead of 289.
yes, but you can get at least 189 on the Arnold Pavone lot.
No, you can't.
No, he said 109. He meant 109.
Yeah.
He said 189. Let's.
Sold. 109 in there.
I don't wanna get press calls in the morning, Pat.
Developing their number
Good
at
thing,
70.
good thing McKinsey.
Right, I'm not
right.
saying it's not possible, but nothing's concrete.
Well, I think nothing is concrete because we haven't voted on and made a recommendation to the council, but I think conservative estimations, we're at least replacing 230 of those parking spots.
Yeah, and the important thing is that we have a plan to replace 289. We understand that some of the options included in that plan are not very popular, and we're continuing to pursue other ones in the hope that we won't have to go that way. But we do have a plan to replace all 289 if we have to.
And I don't think we should.
Even though Ethan's counts, and granted, he
Well, that's another
wants to
thing.
do more, show that we have a number of empty spots most times of the day now.
And the problem is we're not using them efficiently. The problem is we're cutting people off. Right now, we're cutting people off from parking on the street because people need to park more than 2 hours. And they can't because they're effectively banned from parking on the street. $15 is not enough. Even going down to City Hall to get a $3 parking pass is not really, that's not really viable. Not as a long-term solution,
No.
definitely not. We price people, or, price them out, but there was an attorney, Andrew Brockway, who texted me the other day, because he got a parking ticket because he was parked in that 2-hour lot that's next to
He
all
didn't
the
hit you,
bridges.
did he?
What?
He didn't hit you, did he?
No, not this time.
Yeah.
But, and that's an inefficient use of that lot, because there are attorneys that, you might go into court and be out in an hour, be out in an hour and a half, but sometimes it takes 3-4 hours. And if he could have gotten on his phone and added in more time, added in another hour, added in 15 more minutes, he probably would have gladly spent the 50 cents, the dollar, even the $2 to avoid getting a $15 ticket. And, you can focus, the public's focus is on Durkee Street, because that's at the forefront of people's minds, where it's like, we have this field of parking where everyone can go park, but there's empty parking all over the city, and if we can get people to park where they want, and there's a lot of people parking on Durkee Street right now, probably that would be happy to park on the street, but they can't because of the 2-hour limit. And Tori's doing a great job of ticketing people,
Yeah.
and it's what her job is, but it's a bad way to enforce an option.
Yeah.
Time limits are ridiculous.
It's all punishment based, not incentive
And,
based.
they're expensive to enforce. New systems now, our technology is to the point where we can charge the right amount of price. It's cheaper for Tori or easier for Tori to do it because she could look on her thing and say, oh, these time limits are up, I gotta go here.
She's gonna be much more efficient because she won't be issuing as many tickets.
Yeah,
Right.
and Tori basically has to walk over. I don't really know how she does it. I don't think she chocks tires. Maybe she's taking pictures of cars and stuff, but she has to walk around and personally view cars. If we have a better system where she can access the kiosk from her cell phone, access the kiosk from a central data point, or you just go to the kiosk and look in the back, a lot of them do, and they show you what the time limits are and what's going on. It's way more efficient, it's cheaper to manage that system. Certainly there's gonna be a cost with implementing the system. Like every investment, there's an upfront cost, but an efficient parking system for Plattsburgh, I think, is due. With the technology we have today, we can do it, and it can be run effectively. So even if we lose, if we can replace 220 spots, let's say, and lose 69 spots, even then, if we manage the parking that we do have efficiently, which we woefully do not do now, even then, I think we'd have a better parking system for residents and employees, for users, parkers, than we do now. And that added benefit would generate revenue as well, so it's.
And it's also a lot less money up front because if you're talking, well, just to quote what Pat said, 69 to 70 spaces at an average surface space cost between $5,000 and $7,000, that's several $100,000 the city isn't outlaying up front for parking that we don't actually need.
And I've been pretty outspoken, I think any of those things to get to the 289, those proposals that change streets, I don't care if the parking committee unanimously votes other than me to do them. I'm gonna vote against them in the council, maybe they'd overvote me too, because changing streets is ridiculous in the city. It's expensive. I certainly don't wanna make streets one way. I've been talking in the council that I wanna make Court and Brinkerhoff 2 ways all the way down. The only problem with that is you lose parking on one side, and that's politically untenable. But I don't think we should do any of those that change streets. If parking, if we get it and the system is, and it's not working, then we decide that maybe we wanna revamp Court Street to get 34 perpendicular spots, and combined with that Olive Ridley spot, then we can do that later. But why invest the money to do that now if we don't think if it may not be necessary? But I think investing in Court Street, like the county's proposed, is great, because that's just improving lots I already have. We should continue to pursue shared use agreements, because there's a lot of empty lots that are privately owned that aren't used at all, or very rarely. A great example is the one behind, or next to the monopole. There's 34 spaces there, and the most I've ever seen parked there is 4 cars. I'm sure there's sometimes there are more, but I think, but there's a lot of parking throughout the city that's not efficiently used. And I think the parking committee should exist after that, because there may be other things that we can react to how things are going. But I think if we manage our parking, even if we lose some spaces, but we're not talking about losing 289 spaces. I think at most we'll lose.
I think she was just referring to losing 289
Yeah, if
spaces
you're
in the
talking
Durkee Street
abstraction,
parking.
let's be clear.
Yeah.
On Durkee Street, yeah.
It's 30 minutes ago, so you can.
But I'm done.
All right, so we're approaching 7:45. Any questions for Pat or any further
Yeah.
discussion on that?
So if you'd be willing to have allow self-governance in a parking benefit district, why don't you experiment now and allow the special assessment district to do just that?
So how do you think that would work?
I don't know.
What is the special assessment district? Special assessment district is a tax, right?
It's a levy, yeah,
It's a tax on a geographic area, buildings and
based on
properties
square
in a
footage.
geographic area.
Well, and a lot of people actually, a lot of cities have set up something.
Wait, no, don't diffuse. Let us do it.
let you do it? Everyone that pays into the parking
Yeah.
assessment district?
Yeah.
So then, what would you do if you did that? Would you start charging for parking in the Dirty Street lot?
They used to be a paid lot.
And where would you, where would be your geographic jurisdiction?
The district is defined already.
So anywhere.
You should know that, you're in city government. Probably, that information is available to you.
So what?
See, that's part of the problem is, everybody went and ripped this thing apart, and they don't even know what it is.
When ripped what thing apart?
The district, I mean, the things that we paid for over time, you ripped up.
Well, let me ask you this, Dave. You own, the building of the Twisted Carrot and Himalaya, right?
Correct.
How much, square feet is in those buildings?
How much square foot?
Yeah.
Let's see. About 6,000 square feet, not including the basement.
So 6,000 square feet, the current zoning laws have, you have to build one parking spot.
We were all exempt for that because we were
200.
paying for we were exempt because we're in the special assessment district. We
Sure,
paid
so
for
you got
parking.
something in return. If you had to build the 24 parking spaces, then how much would that have cost you?
Don't know.
Okay.
24 parking spaces at 5,000, that's 125 grand.
Assuming you had the,
How much
Real
do you
estate.
have, how
Yeah,
much,
real estate can do it.
how much do your employees pay to park here?
How much do my employees pay for?
City employees.
I don't know.
We don't.
I mean, the college charges their people to park there, their employees.
Well, the city doesn't.
I'm just saying, maybe they should. Maybe this should be open for customers to come in and pay their bills now.
Maybe.
That's
Maybe
council
that's how
decision.
it could be managed.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that's not necessarily a bad idea. Like I said, a lot of cities have or business investment districts that do run their, are in control of where parking meter, revenue is invested into the downtown. And the idea there is that not one of them can take control of it and use it for their own personal benefit. It would be kind of self-governed.
I don't think that's been done.
Not here, certainly. But there are places where it has been done.
Anything else, Dave?
Well, you getting ready to wind it up?
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll get some sand. Are you looking to adjourn? Because
We still got the public comment period, but
Oh.
if you had anything else you want to ask about.
I would like to make a motion that's not on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
As you all probably know, I was late today. I was late last month. I was late the month before that. I'm gonna be late next month because I have town court already scheduled. I would make a motion to relieve me as secretary because I cannot be taking notes and taking accurate minutes. Ethan has been doubling up as secretary and vice president, and keeping the minutes. So I think it makes no sense for me to remain as secretary, and I would make a motion to relieve me as secretary of this committee.
second,
Discussion?
as long as Ethan's willing to take the
Well,
minutes.
can we do it the same thing, just have you guys switch jobs?
I mean, I would say I don't care about the vice chair part. If I was gonna have any role, I'd like to be the secretary because I can take the notes, put it on the website. It's easy. That was the main point of the secretary position, was just to get it onto the city's website. So I'm perfectly fine with if someone else would like to be the vice chair. I can continue the same role that I'm currently doing, which is taking the minutes and.
Perfect. I nominate Rodney Brown as vice chair.
Second.
Do we need
Discussion?
Do we need a roll call the
I
first
think we
thing?
need a roll call on all this stuff.
Yeah, we need a.
Okay.
I don't like how it's.
All right, so, well, you can just effectively resign. We don't have to vote on that.
Yeah, we don't have to.
You can just resign as secretary.
Someone voted no for my appointment as secretary. I make a motion to resign as secretary of the department.
Okay, well, Pat has effectively resigned as secretary, so we need a new secretary. And actually, Ethan, I think you'll have to resign as vice chair.
Yes, I'll resign as vice chair.
Okay, effective immediately. Nomination for new secretary. I make a motion that Ethan be nominated as secretary.
I'll second that.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I think you should do a roll call for
Any opposed?
Is anybody opposed? Okay,
alright.
we're set then. And then,
What's the role of the vice chair?
to fill in for me if I'm not here. Aside from that, I don't think we wrote
And
anything.
to
in the bylaws.
assist in the creation of the agenda
That's right.
is the main. So it's, if someone here would like any role in talking about the agenda before it comes to here, besides what we could all do currently, which is email and bring up something if someone does have their own individual thing they want to talk about or motion, besides just emailing it to Matt, or at that time me, what we can do is that person can be more involved in that sense. Obviously, it's more involvement,
Yeah.
so.
And if you guys have anything you want to discuss, you can always just send me an email and ask if we can add it to the agenda. You don't have to be vice chair for that. But does anybody want to take the job before we?
Yeah, I still nominate Rodney Brown.
Okay.
I'm perfectly willing to entertain other ideas.
All right. Well, I'll second Rodney. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay. All right, we're now at the public comment period. Anybody from the public who wishes to discuss anything parking related is now welcome to come to the podium. Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'd like to use a public comment time. Won't take that. This is my last meeting. I'm resigning.
Okay.
I stuck it out this amount of time. I wanted to give it a chance, but I'm feeling that our input is rarely considered, not valued or wanted, and it's an exercise of futility. So I'm done.
Okay. Well, thank you for
Good luck.
serving thus far. All right, motion to adjourn?
Second that.
Second. All in favor? Okay. Thanks, everybody.